We will continue to fight for the freedom of our people and ensure that peace prevails.
4:03 a.m. Canary border checkpoint, southeastern Burkina Faso. The desert air was still. No birds, no traffic, no radio static, just the soft hum of diesel engines, too many. Then came the flash of headlights, not one, not two, but 57 trucks, crawling through the shadows like a steel centipede. No flags, no escort, no manifest. Just humanitarian logos peeling off the side doors. Something was off. Captain Moussa Kabore, seasoned but skeptical, squinted through his binoculars. He'd seen aid convoys before. They didn't move at this hour, and they didn't flinch when spotted. These did. Within minutes, a call was placed not to a local commander, but directly to Ouagadougou. One man answered. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't hesitate. No committee, no diplomatic cable. He gave the order himself. Surround, no exits, no warnings. By 4:27 a.m., special units were in position, low profile, night-trained, communications blacked out. At 4:42, the first truck was breached. What they found inside stopped every heartbeat on sight. There were no medical supplies, no food, no blankets. Instead, crates, black, unmarked, reinforced with steel. Inside, assault rifles, RPGs, sniper scopes. Boxes of Western-manufactured bullets, each stamped with serial codes, already flagged in 3 international arms trafficking databases. The entire convoy was a mobile arsenal, masked as mercy. The question thundered, who sent these weapons, and for whom? The operation had no precedent, not just for its size, but for its silence. Not a single gun was fired, not one foreign officer present. This was a Burkina Faso-led sting, fully sovereign and utterly damning. As dawn broke over the red Sahel dust, the convoy sat frozen in chains. Soldiers stood, eyes sharp, hands steady, knowing they had just prevented a war, or perhaps uncovered one already underway. This wasn't just a bust, it was a revelation, because for months, whispers of destabilization had circled the region: coups, mercenaries, unexplained caches. But never before had the evidence rolled in on wheels. So who authorized this operation to move across borders under a veil of aid? Why now? And how deep does the deception go? Was Burkina Faso the end destination, or just the beginning of something far darker? What secret was hidden behind those tarps, and who wanted it buried? The tarps came off one by one, flapping like wounded flags in the dry Canary wind. What lay beneath wasn't aid. It wasn't agricultural equipment. It wasn't even legal. Inside the first trailer, stacked wooden crates, military grade, cold to the touch, each one numbered, each one sealed. The kind of seals you don't find in markets, you find them in war zones. By 5:18 a.m., the mobile forensic unit had arrived. Gloves on, cameras rolling, chain of custody tags issued. Crate number 001 contained M4 carbines, American design, but serial numbers trace back to old Libyan stockpiles looted after the fall of Gaddafi. Crate number 002, mortar shells. Crate number 005, Israeli-made sniper scopes, still factory clean. Then came crate number 011. That one had something else entirely. Yemeni RPG 29-second, retrofitted, silent-fired, new, manufactured less than 8 months ago, 57 trucks, dozens of crates each. By the time they tallied the haul, the numbers were staggering. 14,000 rifles, 3,200 anti-tank weapons, 1.8 million rounds of mixed-caliber ammunition. Street value? $725 million. Military value? Enough to arm an invasion, or to tear a country from the inside out. And yet none of the drivers knew. At least, that's what they said. I was told it was tractor parts, one driver stammered, still handcuffed, sitting on the dirt under armed watch. I just drive. They pay. I go. Their IDs were real, licenses valid, routes pre-approved with forged customs papers. Whoever orchestrated this used layers, clean drivers, real logistics firms, satellite phones with rotating SI-MIS. Not amateurs, not rebels, professionals, states or shadow states. But the most chilling discovery wasn't in the crates, it was in the coding. Etched inside the crates' lids were QR patterns linking to offshore registries. shell companies, Cyprus, Dubai, Malta. Trails of money, of contracts, of silence. And if the investigators were right, this wasn't a one-time shipment. It was part of a pattern, routes mapped, customs bribed, deliveries expected. So here's the real question. Who funded a $500 million ghost army disguised as a food convoy? And how many more trucks slipped through before this one? As investigators began cross-referencing weapons with battlefield footage from Sudan, Mali, and the Central African Republic, another realization dawned: this cargo wasn't just about arms, it was about control. But control by whom? And for what purpose? When bullets hide in boxes marked "Hope," who's really pulling the strings? The door slammed shut behind them. 9:26 a.m., the 16th of August, inside the war room of the Kuluba presidential compound in Ouagadougou. No press, no phones, no distractions. Just 5 men and 2 women staring at a digital display showing a weapons list that read more like a war simulation than a border seizure. 25,000 AKs, 10,000 M16 second, 70,000 fragmentation grenades, 400 surface-to-air missiles, read the defense minister, his voice tightening with each line. Across the table, President Ibrahim Traoré said nothing until he did, and when he spoke, it felt like the oxygen thinned. "This is not just a shipment," he said. "It's a script. Libya, Syria. Now they want to stage it here on our soil." Eyes dropped, knuckles whitened. These weren't just numbers, they were the blueprint for a manufactured civil war. Enough firepower to arm 10 battalions, enough explosives to reduce half of Ouagadougou to ash. And every serial number, every crate, suggested an invisible hand far more organized than any rebel cell. The intelligence chief interjected, "Some weapons are fresh, NATO, grade. This isn't leftover insurgency stock, someone invested." The silence that followed was more chilling than outrage, because everyone in that room understood the implication. This was not a rogue operation, this was strategy, engineered destabilization. A line had been crossed and they knew it. The question hanging in the air wasn't just who sent the weapons, it was how many officials saw them coming and looked the other way. When a government intercepts an arsenal big enough to start a war, who exactly was it meant to protect, and who was it meant to destroy? The sun hadn't risen yet, but in Ouagadougou, sirens already screamed through the streets. At exactly 3:47 a.m., coordinated raids began across the capital, no warning, no compromise. Tactical units fanned out across 23 locations, government offices, warehouses, private estates, even an embassy safehouse. The operation had one name, Code Eclipse, and its target? The betrayal buried within. 17 weapons caches were uncovered before breakfast, hidden under floor tiles, behind false walls, beneath luxury villas, grenade launchers in kitchen cabinets, drone parts stored next to wine cellars, diplomatic bags stuffed with encrypted radios and burner phones. The arrests came just as fast and just as shocking. A former Minister of Defense, a decorated general, 3 senior customs officials, several high-ranking businessmen tied to foreign investment funds, and one man whose name burned through the newswire like wildfire, Francois Bongo. Once hailed as a patriot, now handcuffed in public, face exposed, no plea for mercy, under questioning, he confessed, not just to corruption, not just to smuggling, but to Operation Restored Democracy, a blueprint for regime change, planned months in advance, orchestrated from Accra, coordinated through Abidjan, financed in Paris, approved in Washington. The plan was to flood the country with arms, destabilize the borders, trigger internal chaos, then roll out a diplomatic rescue, a familiar pattern, one we've seen from Tripoli to Aleppo. But this time, the pattern broke. This wasn't just treason, it was treason with a logo. So now the question becomes, how many others knew? How deep does the rot go? And if a coup was stopped by one midnight blockade, how many have already succeeded in silence? When loyalty is traded for dollars and flags come with instructions, what does sovereignty mean anymore? The 17th of August, 2025, 10:03 a.m., Ouagadougou. The square outside the National Assembly was packed. Soldiers lined the perimeter, cameras rolled, helicopters circled overhead. At the center of the scene stood a platform. No banners, No theatrics, just a black cloth backdrop and a long metal table. Behind it, a mountain of weapons. Real, unloaded, unforgiving. AK-103 second stacked like firewood. Man 16 second tagged in foreign languages. Crates with missile parts cracked open for the world to see. Then he stepped forward. President Ibrahim Traoré. No teleprompter, no rehearsed smile, just that olive green uniform, dust from the border still clinging to his boots. The silence was electric. Then he spoke. What you see behind me is not the spoils of war, he began. It is the evidence of one. And with that, the screen behind him lit up. First, maps logistical trails from ports in Abidjan, Lomé, and Casablanca, converging like veins into Burkina Faso's central corridor. Then, financial records payments traced from offshore accounts in Cyprus and the UAE, names of fake NGOs, front companies, diplomatic envelopes. Finally, the face everyone knew but didn't expect, Francois Bongo, recorded in custody, voice shaking as he confessed. It wasn't about democracy, that was just the cover. This was about control, about selling the country for contracts, for power, for foreign comfort. The square held its breath. Traoré pointed directly at the mountain of seized weapons. These weren't just bullets, they were ballots in disguise. This was not just an attack on Burkina Faso, it was an assault on African sovereignty. He named names, cities, institutions, former allies. He didn't blink. Representatives from Al Jazeera, Reuters, and France, 24 scribbled notes. But the real audience wasn't the press, it was the people. Live streams ran hot across Mali, Ghana, Chad. Radios translated every word in Moor, Fulfulde, Bambara. Children watched from schools. Farmers tuned in from their fields. What they heard wasn't just a press conference, it was a reckoning. Traoré raised his voice for the closing line. They called it restored democracy, but we call it what it is: orchestrated colonization. This is not a Burkina Faso problem, this is a pan-African warning. He paused, looked straight into the camera. We are not against the world, but we will not let the world rule us through shadows. This land belongs to its people, and that era of remote control from foreign hands is over. Applause, roars, tears. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others clenched fists in renewed purpose. For decades, African nations had been told that coups were domestic errors, that instability came from within, that if only they adopted global best practices, peace would follow. But here it was on live television, proof that chaos had been imported, not born. So the question isn't whether Traoré stopped a coup. The question is, how many others were never stopped at all? Ouagadougou, the 20th of August, 2025, 4 p.m. Quang Trung Doc Lerp. The sun blazed overhead, but the air was electric, not from heat, but from history in the making. Tens of thousands gathered shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on a single makeshift furnace erected in the center of Independence Square. No flags waved, no fireworks, only silence. The kind that holds its breath before a verdict is read. At the foot of the platform, soldiers once trained to fire now carried crates of weapons, not to arm, to melt. The first weapon laid on the conveyor belt was an AK-103, serial number 00117 BKF, seized on the northern border just 4 days prior. Smuggled in a crate marked medical aid, perishable. Now, it was going into the fire. Sparks flew, steel wept under heat. The crowd stood frozen, some with hands clasped in prayer, others with phones shaking, all with hearts pounding. Then came the clang. A new form emerged, not a rifle, not a magazine, but a bronze mold, a school bell, hand-cast, still glowing red. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. He picked up the bell with both hands, raised it to the sky, then brought it down onto a wooden beam. Clang! The sound cracked across the square like thunder. Like a rifle reversed. Like a promise forged. This, he said into the microphone, was designed to kill, but today, it will call children to learn. This is the sound of a new Burkina Faso. The applause wasn't just loud, it was emotional, raw, spontaneous. Parents cried, veterans saluted. Children, many too young to understand geopolitics, but old enough to know fear, cheered as if a ghost had finally been exorcised. For decades, Africa had been told its future depended on the West: loans, doctrine, peacekeeping troops, trade conditionalities. But here stood a nation melting the tools of foreign intervention, not in secret, but in the open, before its people, before the world. Behind Traore, 42 more weapons followed, each melted down, each reshaped into either a school bell, a blackboard frame, or part of a new plough. By nightfall, more than 300 rifles had been transformed, not stored, not hidden, transformed. And this wasn't just symbolic. The bronze from those weapons is now being distributed to 17 provinces. Rural schools in Kosi, Tapoa, and Yatenga will each receive one bell, each engraved with the same words Traore spoke that day: "No child should fear what the world forgot to fix." International media called it unprecedented. CNN dubbed it the most poetic disarmament since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Al Jazeera's field reporter wept on live television. African Union observers called it a continental precedent. And across Ghana, Togo, and Niger, discussions began: what if arms seizures ended not in courtrooms, but in classrooms? But this wasn't just a media spectacle. This was political theater with steel-hard edges, a deliberate redefinition of power not through shock and awe, but through redemption and redirection. In the crowd stood Aissata, a 10-year-old girl from Kaya. Her school had been closed for 2 years due to insecurity. She clutched her father's arm, watching the bell ring. When asked what it meant to her, she didn't pause. "It means I can go back to learning without the guns." That's what shook people. Not just the fire, not just the melting, but the clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating traitors. It was about rebuilding, meaning turning trauma into toolkits. Traore closed the ceremony with one final line: "The world wanted these weapons to be forgotten in the shadows, but we have chosen to reshape them in the Sunday. We will not let violence define our future. We will forge it by hand, in front of our children." The crowd erupted, but even in the noise, a deeper truth settled in the air. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about rewriting a script that had run far too long. Guns in, books out. Chaos in, dignity out. So now, the question that lingers isn't whether this bell will ring again. The real question is, can the sound of peace echo louder than the noise of war across a continent still bleeding from old scars? The sky over Ouagadougou was golden that evening, dust and sunlight blending into the kind of glow that makes history feel tangible. On the steps of the Ministry of National Identity, a new plaque was unveiled, simple, unadorned, cast from melted rifle barrels. It read, "The 16th of August, Day of Awakening and National Victory." But this wasn't about commemorating a raid. This was about reclaiming a future. In the days following the interception of the 57 smuggled trucks, the story didn't stop at the border. Interpol launched an international inquiry. What started as a domestic sting exploded into a continental reckoning. Arrests followed in Morocco, Togo, France. Anonymous accounts were frozen. Supply chains were dissected. Cargo manifestos exposed a spiderweb of shell companies, stretching from the Sahel to the Mediterranean. For once, Burkina Faso wasn't a passive footnote in global politics. It was a force that changed the conversation. And the weapons? Every last one melted, catalogued, processed, and sold as reclaimed metal on the international market. But what happened to the proceeds was where the true legacy took shape. The government pledged transparency and delivered. The funds were redirected to something no private contractor or foreign donor had proposed: reconstruction from within. 100 new schools, 50 community hospitals, over 1,000 kilometers of irrigation canals. Not in headlines, but in concrete. Not in theory, but in ground broken and walls raised. Traore stood before the National Assembly on the 6th day after the bust, no longer just a military leader, but something else, an architect of civic rebirth. "Victory," he said, "is not the seizure of 57 trucks. True victory is 57 million hearts-awakened children who learn, elders who heal, farmers who feed a nation again. That is the battlefield now. That is our new front line." And there it was. The transformation of trauma into structure, of interception into instruction, of sabotage into sovereignty. Because in a world saturated with conflict narratives and headlines built for outrage, Burkina Faso did something different. It told a story of consequence, of cause and cure, of turning weapons into wells and school bells, not just to survive but to mean something. The lesson here isn't about border patrol tactics, it's not even about coup prevention. It's about ownership of destiny, of dignity, of what a nation dares to do when it stops waiting for permission and starts building with its own hands. So now the questions are ours to ask. If one of the world's poorest countries can intercept a war and forge a peace in the same week, if a nation under sanctions can build hospitals from confiscated rifles, if children can ring bells cast from the metal that once threatened them, then what exactly is stopping the rest of us? Because Burkina Faso didn't just stop 57 trucks, it started a movement. And maybe, just maybe, this is how the future fights back, not with more firepower, but with clarity, with courage, and with a hammer striking a new bell in the middle of Africa. Was this story worth your time? Save this video. Share it with someone who still believes in transformation. Leave a comment. What would you melt a weapon into? Because the struggle isn't over, and your voice may be the next tool we need.